3 seats here in the front and there on the left. Thank you. So, hi everyone, and thank you for coming here for this event today. Then sorry for a delay because we are still waiting for Juhani to come because of some troubles with the traffic and the transport. And let me ask you, well, who is coming from the Kotlin user group here? I just wanted to see, that's few people. Okay, Android. Okay, the rest is a Flutter, is it correct? Okay. Oh yeah, that's pizza-driven development is a great thing. And oh no, well, it's fine. But it turns off if you don't click the button. So this is a joint event, and so we know like almost here from such of these groups. And thank you for coming. And today we have a really long agenda, and we start with the Flutter talk by Vince. Vince is here. Then we'll do probably the cross-platform by Juhani and Jasper. Jasper, are you here? Yeah. Oh, great. And the second part, we'll do the multi-platform by Jossi. And are you here, Jossi?
He's not here yet.
I think he's coming with Juhani. And at the end, Hadi will spread the word about the Ktor and Kotlin, right? So, and that's a few words to thank our sponsors. So we are at JetBrains here, and JetBrains is offering you some pizzas and beers. Oh, by the way, the beers are in the fridge if you haven't noticed that. So go ahead and grab some. And we have some swag on this table on the left. So if you would like to have some stickers, just grab it. Or pins, there are Kotlin pins as well. And actually for Kotlin, I tend to say like expect fun, because it has to be fun here, right? And by the way, if you're still interested in Kotlin, we're gonna be doing the Kotlin Conf event, the parts of Kotlin Conf Global. That would be in February. So, and if you have an idea of a great talk to discuss and see at that event, let us know, because we are picking the best several talks to watch together at the event. So please let us know if you have some ideas. And today, closer to the end, we'll do some raffle. And if Juhani will hear about to raffle several books. And we're about to raffle 3 licenses. So we'll do it at the end. So if you like, stay here, because you have to be here to have a chance to win something, right? And that's now time for an actual fun. And Vince, that's your turn now.
Yeah, so Can you hear me well? Or okay, cool. Okay, so my name is Vince. I'm organizing the Flutter Munich meetup events in Munich. I actually so I thought we'll have the different talk first. So I didn't really include many cross-platform like general things. But I think anyway, let's start. So I want to basically share with you how I got started with Flutter. I worked for a small, I worked for a company with a small development team, and we were all basically JavaScript developers. We used JavaScript on the back end, and on the front end, we used Vue. And at one point, basically, we started thinking about writing a mobile app, and we wanted an app, and we basically had to evaluate different options. The first option is to go full like native, but I think this this didn't really match our team because we were basically all, I mean, we had experience with other languages and frameworks as well, but we tried to keep the languages and frameworks that we are using to minimum. So we were mostly using TypeScript, JavaScript, and and also I think it has the notation that it's difficult to find good mobile developers, and the native development is slow and expensive. Maybe it's not true. It's not always true. And actually, I wanted to basically just say that if I don't mean to, but when I say my opinions about different frameworks, maybe I don't know enough about it, and that's why I don't. So I think you are all safe. I think native will be here, web development will be here for a long time without Flutter as well. So I think that's all fine. We also considered using React Native. I think this was where I have this, like it's like the Bielefeld conspiracy theory. Is that, have you ever met like a happy, satisfied React Native developer? Or are you a happy React Native developer? Or have you met someone who knows someone who writes React Native and is happy about it? And I haven't, but I go to these kinds of meetups. I've been going to these meetups for some time, and anytime I spoke to someone with React Native experience, they were very frustrated, and we didn't really want to use React Native because of this. And I think we, like software developers, we want to believe that we are rational and we are making informed decisions, but I think sometimes you just rely on other people's opinions, and I think this was the case for us with React Native. Oops, sorry. We also considered Kotlin Multiplatform, which I think we liked because we would have liked to try Kotlin, but we weren't sure that people are actually using it. And also, as far as I know, I'm not 100% sure if this is correct, but you write Kotlin, the business logic in Kotlin, and you basically have to implement the UI in native, like either Swift or Kotlin. But maybe that's, I think we just spent a couple of hours researching it, and maybe it has changed. And this brings to Flutter. I think I like to read this description. This is from the Flutter website, because I think almost all words are important in this description. So Flutter is Google's UI toolkit for building beautiful natively compiled applications for mobile, web, and desktop from a single code base. So just to dissect, I think starting from the back, you start with a single code base, so you don't need to write iOS apps, different Android apps. Basically, you can share the code, which has many benefits. One is that you have basically one team, and you can work together. Your code reviews will be better. I think it has lots of benefits. And as I mentioned, you can write iOS apps, Android apps, web and desktop apps. And I think natively compiled, this just basically means it's fast enough. And yeah, so one feature I think that's very interesting is the stateful hot reload, which means that you can, with Flutter, you can basically edit your code, like command save your code, and it will immediately show up on your emulator or your physical device. And it's also stateful, so if you are editing something at some hidden screen, you don't need to navigate back all the time. So basically, this is what you can see. They edit the strings. It will show up in a second. And in this example, they basically click the reload button, but you can configure your editor to automatically reload on every save. Flutter also handles many things that are platform specific, handles it for you. For example, this is the navigation like the transitions. So on the right, you can see the iOS navigation, like push back and forth. It comes from right to left, and on Android, it basically fades in and out, and also like it's a vertical motion. But there are many other things that are handled for you. For example, in the list view, when you are basically over-scrolling, it's different on iOS and Android. And also you have adaptive widgets and so on. And this is the... I won't have too much code on these slides, but basically you have widgets in Flutter, stateless widgets and stateful widgets. This is a stateless widget example. The important part is that the build method has to return a widget, and you can basically, if the Flutter libraries don't handle the platform-specific behavior, or you want to have different behavior on different platforms, or something is just not possible on, for example, iOS, then maybe you don't want to show that button. So you can basically do it yourself and change the widget that you render based on the platform that you are on. You can also write iOS applications. So for that, you will most likely use the Cupertino library, which is basically just means that widgets that look and feel like native, like iOS. I don't know how they call it, but like UI elements. I think that's good enough. Flutter also has like this layered architecture, and if you don't see like these specifics, it doesn't really matter. This part at the top is Dart. In the middle, you have the engine, which is C, C++, and at the bottom you have the embedder, which is platform specific. And here, the point that I'm trying to make is that all of this is written in Dart. So you have the material widgets, Cupertino widgets, rendering, painting, gestures. Everything is handled by Dart. And this is, I think, very interesting because you can basically just jump to the code and read everything. I mean, not everything, as I mentioned, but a lot of things you can read it for yourself. And all the implementation details are there for you to read. You can read it. It's also open source. This example I wanted to show is the iOS activity indicator. So this is the Cupertino activity indicator. It doesn't have many configuration options because, I mean, on iOS you are not supposed to use these activity indicators with so many beautiful colors as on the right. But this is one example that I use that you can basically read the iOS activity indicator, and I just basically made everything configurable. So you can configure the colors, the size of the, like here in the middle, the inner radius, the count, how many of these little ticks you have, how fast it spins, and I think it's very useful because when something doesn't work the way you want, you can just read the code and basically change it however you want. I think a lot of people ask why Dart though, and I think I understand this sentiment because we all have our favorite languages. Probably for most of you is Kotlin, and I think Kotlin is actually like whenever I see a Flutter video where they mention that they use Dart, like half of the comments are, "Why don't you use Kotlin?" I think so. I think the main reasons are that it's JIT compile. So this is what enables hot reload. You can also ahead of time compile. So it will make your basically your app faster and more predictable. You also have types. Dart is also very easy to learn, especially if you are coming from a JavaScript, Java, Kotlin, Swift, C#. I think it's very easy. You can basically start writing code in an hour or probably less. And it also compiles to JavaScript. And I think one important point is that it's also basically run mainly by Google. So the Dart team and the Flutter team can cooperate, and they can shift priorities and make the language better so that they can make the Flutter framework better as well. And if the language would be under the influence of some other group, they would have to be basically constantly fighting over what they do and what they don't. This is so it's all nice when everything works and you can write your code in Dart, but sometimes you will have to rely on code that you already have, or something that requires an audit, or some very complicated library, third-party library, and in that case you can't, or it's not practical to re-implement it in Dart. For those cases, you can have platform channels. So here basically you have the Flutter app, and it communicates to the iOS host or the Android host, depending on which mobile you are running the application on. Yeah, so on Dart, you just create a method channel and you invoke a method, and you can pass arguments. You can also create streams between the two, but this is just a simple example. And on the platform channel, I'm using the Kotlin example. You, again, just create a channel, a method channel, set a listener on it, and based on the method name, you can execute anything and just return the result. And you can also have platform views. Maybe that would be good for what one example I had, like Google Maps, for example, as far as I know, and also Twilio SDK. It's like a video, and I think I don't know if you know it, but Twilio offers a video SDK, and you can make calls. And I think that would be very difficult to re-implement it yourself. And of course, you can also just create a new activity and just forget about Flutter for some part of your application, and then come back to Flutter. So Flutter also runs on web. This is the architecture overview. So you can see it's layered, and you can basically just switch all of those and use what's available for you in the browser. So DOM, JavaScript, Canvas, and you don't need to modify the top level, and then you can just render as usual. I have honestly I have a bit of concerns about Flutter on web. I think it feels like there are already so many good frameworks, Vue.js, Angular, and I think those work well. And I think it's also a bit like reinventing the wheel, because you had everything there in the browser, and they basically have to re-implement everything. So I think text selection and like double click on text doesn't work right now. And the apps that I saw, the performance was just not that good. And also most plugins don't work yet. But I think it's gonna change. And also one other question is, how you are going to integrate with the existing web ecosystem. I think TypeScript is popular because basically it's very easy to basically pull in code, old JavaScript code, and just make it typed and or just define types for someone else's code. I don't know how it will work. And just as a disclaimer, I don't have a ton of Flutter experience on the web. I think most people don't have because it's quite new. And it's also currently in tech preview. So this means that what was slow like 2 months ago could be fast enough in a couple of weeks. Yeah, I think we have time for like a quick demo, hopefully. Sorry. Okay, it just samples. Okay, I'm not gonna. I'm sorry. I'm gonna skip it. So you can add web, add Flutter web to your existing Flutter projects. It's basically just a couple of lines of code, like a couple of commands. I think this information is important for those of you who are already using Flutter, but it only works on dev and master channel. And you basically just need to set a flag that, okay, I understand the risks, that it's a tech preview, but I want to try the web as well. So you can just basically, once you enable that flag, you can run Flutter build web and then see what is broken in case there are plugins that don't support web yet or cannot support web at all, and then you need to fix those issues. I really like this talk. This person is talking about predicting the future of web development, and here he mentions that the WebAssembly will basically not eat JavaScript and the JavaScript frameworks that are out there. It will just make the web app pie bigger. And one example I think he mentioned was Figma, and the whole team was basically C++ developers. And for them, it was just, okay, now we can run it in the browser as well. So I think I have similar predictions for Flutter on web. I think it's not going to replace JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. But I think it will enable teams that already have mobile apps to basically achieve this quick win and just make their application run on the browser as well. And I think it's good also for games, simple apps, internal apps. So I think it's going to be very good for those teams that already have Flutter apps and just want to make it work on the browser, because it's really fast. And I think if it's not perfect, but it takes you 2 hours to make your app run in the browser, it's better than spending 2 months basically rewriting everything, or probably more, depending on the size of your app. Flutter also runs on, So Flutter also runs on desktop. I think it really has the potential to become an Electron alternative. I think a lot of people always complain about, okay, Electron is huge, it's consuming too much memory, which is true, but sometimes it's good enough. So I don't want to just complain about Electron, but I think with Flutter, it can be faster and smaller. So I think it's nice. If you already use Flutter, again, the workflow is similar. You just enable a couple of flags, and then you can, for example, when you list your devices, you will see that, okay, macOS is there. You can then run Flutter run, and then your app is running. You can also use Dart outside of Flutter if that's interesting for you. one place where they do that is Angular Dart. It's an older, more mature framework. Don't confuse it with Angular or AngularJS. I think they have probably similar roots, but they basically diverged and they don't really coordinate that much. But it's a mature framework. Google Ads was written in it, and it's also open source. And I think it's it's a good experience on web because you are basically using normal DOM that most people are used to, and I think that has its benefits. You can also run Dart on the backend. So this is one framework I tried out for the last event. I don't want to go into much details, but I mean it's what you would expect. You have routing. You register the routes. You link those routes to different controllers or functions, and you can add middlewares. So one function or controller can be responsible for verifying, for example, the auth tokens. And so I think I tried it. I think it worked very well. You also have request binding, so the library, the framework has a rich feature set, and I think it feels nicer than response dot TMID as integer and handle errors. The framework will handle those for you. You also have open API documentation basically for free, and I think that's also very useful when you have multiple applications on your team and you are new and you have no idea how it works, what endpoints there are, and you don't need to read the whole code. You can just use this documentation, but which is standard, by the way. So I also have a live demo. I've been live demoing all along. So this application is a Flutter desktop application. So I mean, it won't work too well. You can see here the overflow and everything, and it also works on web. So as I mentioned, basically I compiled the same application for web, and I'm running a simple HTTP server. I'm using Python, but there must be a Dart alternative as well. But I'm using a simple HTTP server for basically serving the files, and you can just see that everything. I mean, probably not everything. There will be some broken screens because I'm not handling. So there's no responsive design, no media queries or anything. But I think it's nice to see that you can so quickly make your app work on basically multiple platforms. So, boop. Boop. So I think, I could show how, one sec. I wanted to show, I need to go there, sorry. I basically wrote the slides. I didn't handle jump to this page, but so here you can see. Let me put those next to each other. So on the right you have the switches that are will be the material design switches, and on the left you have the iOS style widgets, and I think so these are handled for you automatically. This is the I think it's called overscroll. I'm not sure. It's handled, you can see, differently, and so we could see hot reload. I want to show like quickly the hot reload. I need to rearrange the screens so that you can see it. Here. So these are the two screens I want to have. I want to make it smaller so that you can see it. It's time. Okay, so basically, let's make it. I hope it's running. Yeah, so you can make like the switch list, like the switches make to checkboxes, and then everything just automatically. But yeah. Oh. So how to get started? I think you could check out the Flutter Munich meetup and join at one of our next events, obviously. We also have a couple of, actually, like some of the screens had small images or text because I've written it in Flutter, but anyway. So we have a couple of events. One is the Flutter Interact viewing party, which is next week. It's going to be just very chill. Just drink together and watch the Flutter Interact event together, which is actually now, but I didn't know that we will have the same event. So we organized this event first. We also have like extensions from Stefan. Basically extensions, I think it's very similar to Kotlin extensions, and now everyone who used Kotlin is now rewriting everything with Dart extensions. Ben, if he's okay, Ben will talk about Vim as an IDE for Flutter development. I think it's very interesting. I saw him code. It's mine. And we don't have the dates for these events yet, but it's going to be end of January and mid-February. And we also have one in March that's fixed. Will Larsch is the, I think, lead Flutter, material design lead for Flutter. But he's going to present at MWC and also like a similar talk for us. I will talk about automated testing, and in mid-March we'll have FFI, foreign function interface, which basically enables you to call, I think, C code from Flutter and Dart. And yeah, also how to get started. Just search for Flutter for Android developers. It's a great guide. It's official documentation. I think it really does a great job at translating different concepts that are familiar for Android developers to basically Flutter concepts. And I think why you should also do it, because I think platform knowledge is still vital. It's still so, like for me, I didn't have mobile experience. I need to basically struggle with like the App Store, signing and everything. I mean, I figured those things out, but these are annoying. And also, so many times someone asked me, can I do this in Flutter? And my answer is, I don't know, can you do it at all? So this is, I think, platform knowledge is still very important and useful. And I lied. We don't have pizza yet, or beer. We will have the...
Plenty of beers in the fridge.
Okay. I thought we will have the break, but anyway, I will have beer. So, yeah, that's it. Thank you for listening.
What? Is it fine if you show his presentation from your computer?
Yeah.
He sent the link in the same chat.
Yeah.
Just to make it better.
Messages. Docs.
Thank you for helping.
We have a clicker connected already, right?
Yes, we do.
Okay, then I'm gonna connect it.
Present.
It's the same one.
Yeah, you require the golden one because that's.
Let's chart.
Yeah, sure.
I need Okay. All right. Just go here. Are we gonna continue straight ahead, or we wait for beers, right? Do we need mic? Do you use mic? Do we need to use mic? Oh, sorry. I think we need to use mic, right? But we have only one mic. Hello. Hello.
Do we need
I think it's not supposed to work, but we have to.
How's it going?
Yeah, it works. You just got in.
If you want,
So if you want the second one, yeah.
Do you want to hang out one of those?
I can do that.
It's gonna yell
turn off.
Okay.
While you put it on.
You got a mic?
Are they going to interact with each other, interfere with each other?
No.
Let's try that.
Is that working now?
Now it's working. Now I've got it.
All right, let's get started. We need to not mix our beers.
I'll put mine on the floor.
All right. Hello, everybody. Sorry I'm late from the meetup because of the amazing public transit of Munich. The trains weren't working again. I don't know where our tax money goes, we'll talk about that later. Very quickly, I was supposed to be in start to introducing the GDG Android. I'm one of the organizers. Bino here? Bino was here. Ah, there we go. So Bino is here, almost in the front row, and I'm one of the organizers of the GDG Munich Android. So if you have any thoughts about the Android side of things, come talk to us. We had we had a thought about we're going to do this kind of learning thing every week, the joint learning thing every week from January on. So let's have a discussion. If people are interested about like coming in one place together every week, some evening, something, talk to me or talk to Bino. We're going to figure out. Antonio might be helping with this as well. Okay. So, let's get started. We're going to talk about cross-platform in the real world. We just heard about Flutter. And we're going to talk about how it actually works. Sorry about that. So this is not going to be a technical talk. This is something that we're going to talk about what we learned in the past. Jasper and I, we share 45 years of experience together, so we've been doing it a long time. So Jasper and I work together in this small company here in Munich, and we write a lot of apps. But before that, we've been doing a lot of other things. So we're going to talk about what we're going to figure out before.
Clicker.
Oh.
Thanks. Yeah. So cross-platform. So we over the years have had lots of conversations about cross-platform for mobile, and said a mixture of probably not very nice things over the years. So it's gone kind of quiet on that conversation, that cross-platform conversation over the last 2-3 years. We've been very happy not to be having that conversation with the customers and other developers. But recently that's changed. Something changed, and customers kept, in the last sort of 18 months, started asking us more and more about cross-platform. So rather than hold on to our old ideas, we might be old guys, but we try to think about the world in a new way as much as possible. And we went back to looking at cross-platform again. We read some articles and did some thinking about what cross-platform, and we realized that cross-platform is actually quite an old ideal, older than us, in fact. So when we looked at it, actually cross-platform really goes back to the good old days of '97, and if you're lucky enough to have been working with Swing, you'd have built beautiful IDEs like this, or UIs like this. Actually, I gave this talk to a very young crowd not so long ago, and it got very blank stares with these next slides. But for some of us, this is kind of familiar.
Java wasn't the only one. Smalltalk and Visualworks also were trying to do cross-platform UIs. And amazingly, if you're really interested, it's still available. You can download it, install the IDs, run it. Not sure if I'm recommending that, but it's possible. Right? So from those days, actually, we got to see a lot more cross-platform emerging. Good old JSR 86 that we all love. That's basically Java on mobile around 2000. Zool from Firefox days came along. This beauty here from Adobe. Thank you very much, Adobe. So Flex. Microsoft thought it was a great idea, so here comes Silverlights. And then everything looked much, much better. HTML5 came along. The browsers were more or less playing with each other better. Things were looking good. Almost good. Thank you, Adobe, once again. So, yeah, by around sort of 2008, things looking pretty good on the web. Until...
So yes, and then this small company from America released this small phone that everybody laughed at. But things had started to happen. I'm not a huge fan of iPhone myself, but things started to happen. And the cross-platform became kind of new thing again. So this is the idea of saving a lot of money and doing things again. So, then we started going from the start again. All of these things. How many of you been using PhoneGap or Cordova or PhoneGap, whatever it's called today? Sorry, guys. Things were horrible, right? Xamarin at some point was kind of promising thing. I don't know if Microsoft still drags it along, but I don't know. There's some things. You see the years, they be kind of getting closer and closer to today, and there's still something last year being released. So, it just keeps happening, right? So we've been doing this for 20 years. Everything should be right. Everything's perfect. So I don't know, those of you who might know me, I've not been very quiet about how crap cross-platform been in the past. I've been raving against it for a long time. But there's some good reasons, There's something like, some couple of reasons go through here. So, what happened with Flash? Cross-platform ended when Apple said we're not going to put Flash on the phone. Actually, at the time, I was an Android user. I was like, yeah, we have Flash. That's better. Actually, thank Steve Jobs for killing Flash. It was very good. All of these things, right? So now you have a platform that you can't run anymore, right? Silverlight died. Good riddance, right? The guy who was running Silverlight is now running Flutter on Google, so I hope he learned a lot of things. This is not actually meant to be a diss. I actually think he has learned from the past. I don't hate Flutter as much as I do Silverlight. The other thing is you create something like a PhoneGap application. So which one of these is an application? It's the one with the blue status bar. Right? But they are just wrapped in the browser. So this is one of my pet peeves of all of these things that, web views especially. If you want to build a web application, keep it in a browser. Users know how to interact with the browser. If you bring the same UI into a wrapped application, especially now Google supports PWAs directly in the Play Store, I think that's a mistake. Users don't know how the back works. All of these things are different. I don't like having web applications in there. This one, you're in an awesome application when you get a cookie. The big problems, things just don't look right. If you there's one guy in the audience who began complaining about Firefox not working well on the Mac platform ever because it's not native. It doesn't quite feel like it works there. You see these applications, they're all a little bit off, right? All the buttons are wrong, things don't quite work right. The same application built into many platforms. When I talk about this to people, I get comments like these that really piss me off, but fortunately there's Twitter I can go and vent. But think about it's okay. Why do we need to? If we build the same UI multiple times, why do we need to write the same UI multiple times or draw the same pixel multiple times? UI is not pixel, or UX is not pixels. There's much more behind the UI. It's everything to scroll speed, everything about all of these minor things that help users to understand how the user interface works. It matters. Then I said, okay, here's 2 screenshots. I bet you can't tell which one is native. True. But give me the application, and I can probably tell. Something is going to be wrong. Something is not working quite right. And the uncanny valley is from movie industry and games industry. It's about the idea of the animation of human face and human characters is getting so good that you can't tell why it's wrong, but your brain still goes like, that's not a human. You cannot go, the eyes are not moving right. You cannot pinpoint the same thing. And same thing happens a lot with the cross-platform, especially with things like React Native. It's just, okay, it looks about right. I take a screenshot, I can't tell what the difference is. Somehow it just doesn't feel right. And all of these things increase the cognitive load of your head when you're using the application. And it makes you feel, the users make feel it's heavy to use. They're difficult to use. I've been fighting against this for a long time. This is an article I dug up from 2012. This is that made the people at the Titanium, Accelerator Titanium, really hate me for some reason. Okay, then there's sort of just real-life problems with the cross-platform in the past. Things just, take a long time. Well, remember Flash? Firing up Flash in a mobile browser? Things just don't work, right? So basically, memory out. They are quick to build, but they are very hard to maintain. So I draw this. I didn't do this. I had this idea for this graph. I asked my designer to draw this graph. So this is kind of it's exaggerated, but it's a starting point of discussion, which I've been seeing this many times. It applies even to the new ones like Flutter, often. You have the demo. The demo is always amazing. It works always perfectly. Then you go to the real-world products, and the exponential curve does there. So there's a small part where some of these tools work really well. Some of them then don't work. Now, I do not know, but I have a feeling that with Flutter, the curve is starting to getting down, and I think Flutter might be all right. Then we had the stories like this, right? You heard the very public failure of React Native from Airbnb. They were the flag holders of React Native for a long time, and they tore it down from there. So they felt like they should throw everything out and build everything again. There's some good reasons, some bad reasons, and if you look at the blog post and all of those things, they don't really hate React Native so much. I do, but they don't. Then there's Dropbox. Recently, they a long time, they had the backend in C++, and it was running on the native on iOS and Android. They just built the user interface in front of it. And they recently, a couple of weeks ago, wrote this post, we're going to stop it, because we can't find C++ developers. We can't find the people to build this for us. It's difficult to maintain. There's no documentation. All of these things are difficult. So, why I was just talking about this. So there must be something right. There's a promise in there. There's the promise that if we have to do something only once instead of twice makes so much sense that we're still here. We're looking into options. We're finding a way, trying to find a way how we can do this happen. And maybe it will happen. It's expensive to run multiple platforms. You want to talk about these things then? There you go.
Yeah, I'll talk about some. Okay. So let's go through some reasons why. Oh, hold on, I'll go back.
We can go to the back button.
So let's talk about some reasons why cross-platform hasn't died. Why we're still talking about it. Why people are still trying to build cross-platform. So yeah, it is expensive. I think Vince was mentioning that as well. It's expensive to run all of the platforms because you essentially going to have larger teams with more people in your teams, and that's just going to cost money. Larger teams themselves create their own problems. So if you work in large teams, eventually somebody's going to throw you a Spotify something or other, right? Usually Spotify comes up, and you usually end up with a picture like this, and you're like, that's solving my problem? Really? I don't know. So large teams come with problems themselves. So yeah, cross-platform, could that solve that? I don't know. Lines of communication, this might be familiar to a lot of you. The more people you have in a team, the more lines of communication you have. People are notoriously bad communicating with each other, even when we're all speaking the same language, the same mother tongue language. And it doesn't take many people, here we go, 14 people, to have 91 different lines of communication. And anyone who's worked in a big organization or a big team knows that communication is a real killer. Right? This is pretty obvious, right? If you write the same app across multiple platforms, you're repeating not just the feature development, but you're repeating testing, you're repeating bug fixing, you're repeating release cycles. So cross-platform, okay, we come from a very mobile-centric world, but let's not forget that most companies live in a world that's not just mobile. Of course, there's web, that's pretty obvious. But actually, it's not just that, right? You still got desktop. USSD in some regions, that's applications over SMS are very popular. Home automation is becoming very, very common now. Cars, talk to Juhani about cars and that piece. Wearables, IoT, we're going to have more interactions across screens. Yeah, not just the ones we own, but the ones we come across in our daily lives. This was a photo I took the day before we gave this talk for the first time. This is a coffee machine in a hotel, right? So our coffee machines now have UIs. They're now interactive, right? And that's just one example how device explosion is happening already. Hopefully this is familiar to some of us, right? This pain, it's not a good one, but it's a reality. Feature parity. A lot of companies go with a lead platform. iOS as a lead, or in some regions, Android as a lead. And then the next platform is kind of tacked on or has to catch up all the time. And keeping everything synchronous, getting releases happening all the time can be a real challenge. This is maybe a bit of a sensitive topic for some, because a lot of people have associated cross-platform with basically managers trying to not spend money, trying to do things on the cheap, right? The fact is there is a skills shortage. We just have to accept that, right? We don't have anyone who's tried to recruit or build a team, a mobile team or a cross-platform team, know that there's a real skills shortage out there. And it's not just startups or less known companies who are having this problem. Companies like Airbnb, which we talked about earlier, they're having that problem. That was one of the initial kind of reasons why they went to look at React Native. They just couldn't find the team members for their mobile teams. So it's not just the small players. UI convergence, I think Juhani had something more to say about that.
Yeah, so the interesting thing about if you follow the iOS and Android right now, the user interfaces, the patterns are converging. There's a lot of things that are happening really quickly. It's now bottom navs everywhere. It's now swipe to back everywhere. It's all of these things. So this chart is something that was interesting, and I got it from Lyft. They wrote about this, and 28% of Lyft Android engineers have never seen Android-specific UI design. And Lyft is an application, a team that is very progressive. It's always that people are talking there. Talking in conference, they talk about UI, they are a part of the Android community. But still that's kind of the thing. If we kind of moving towards the similar platforms anyways, maybe some of the problems we presented earlier no longer matter so much. So yeah, that's nice. Cross-platform never dies. Okay, let's talk about a couple of things that are happening today, which is things. So Kotlin, Multiplatform, Flutter, WebAssembly. These are some of the things that we, as a company and individuals, we feel like this might make a lot of sense in some point. How many of you were in the Kotlin Conf last week? Okay, you probably didn't miss the fact that it was all about multi-platform. At least half of the talks were about multi-platform. The keynote was 75% of multi-platform. JetBrains is really pushing it hard, and it really makes a lot of sense. It really starts to look to me that it's no longer a side project for JetBrains. It's really hard for it. They built their own product on the multi-platform. So of course, Kotlin and Android makes a lot of sense. We already have native Kotlin and Android. The big problem that Google has with Java is, Oracle owns it, and Oracle, fuck them. Kotlin is owned by a foundation. It cannot be stolen. It cannot be bought. It cannot. Even if Oracle comes and buys JetBrains, they don't get Kotlin. If somebody buys Google, they won't get Kotlin either. So it's something that is, Kotlin has already a lot of resources everywhere. It's very liked language. This was some of the people really like Kotlin. Android developers in the audience probably like it, and I think the people in the Kotlin user group probably like it as well. To me, why Kotlin multi-platform, to me, for the applicable projects, seems really, really good. It's not all or nothing approach. So you don't have to go at the start of the project and go, we do all in Kotlin multi-platform. You can do it as much you want, or you can as little as makes sense. Tooling is already there. We can use IntelliJ, Android Studio, whatever we have. JetBrains built the tooling already. And the key thing about this one, and I think this is something that there was a question about this in Kotlin last week, and I think it's super, super important, especially the people in the audience. How many of us are Android developers here? Quite a few, right? How many are iOS developers? One. Okay, almost half. So the point about this one is, there was a question in Kotlin Conf about this. How do we communicate the idea of multi-platform to the iOS developers? And this is super important. The idea of bringing Kotlin multi-platform into a project doesn't mean that we want the iOS people drop Swift. The iOS people will be writing Swift. Kotlin multi-platform is a library built by the Android developers in the team that is given to the team, right? And that's about it. So I think Kotlin multi-platform is a great tool. It doesn't work in most projects. I think currently I would advocate it to maybe 40% of projects. It depends a lot. It's a tool. Use the best tool for the best job. Don't go, we all need to go to Kotlin multi-platform now because JetBrains will space on multi-platform. The important thing, I think, to me, the preconditions for going Kotlin multi-platform means that you have to go into a project that's built Android first. The Android team will have to build the libraries that they're going to later be consumed by the iOS. It doesn't mean it has to go Android production. It means that it's going to be built first. There has to be quite heavy business logic as part of the application. Otherwise, it's not making sense. If it's just a lightweight application that calls the REST APIs and renders the results on the UI, it's very little point doing this. But if you have a heavy application that has a lot of logic, you have to write in multiple times and test multiple times, all of these things, now you start gaining a wins out of it. We're not going to talk about the Kotlin multi-platform too much. Jossi is going to talk today, and there's a recording of other Jossi's talk as well. So, Flutter.
Yeah, so
you can have this one.
Yeah, thanks. I'm going to try not to repeat a lot of stuff that Vince very eloquently described around Flutter. So I'll skip over a few of these, try not to talk too much. But for me, one of the interesting things is that Flutter actually tries to build on some of the lessons we've learned for cross-platform since 1997, and actually a little bit beyond that. So what are these exactly? So drawing natively, right? If you look at cross-platform over the years, you can see this trend. So Swing, then we got SWT, which was used Eclipse, it's used SWT to try and draw natively with Java. Flash kind of started to die as soon as HTML supported things like video and Canvas natively. PhoneGap kind of also started to get less popular as React and Xamarin started to try and do things natively. So Flutter is trying to do things natively, but really draw things natively. I think this is a really important one as well. There's something that feels just kind of wrong about trying to put HTML and JavaScript onto a phone and pretend it's an app. It's not an app. PWAs are great because they're intended for web technologies. Wrapping a basic HTML JavaScript into an app doesn't seem the right approach. So Flutter doesn't do that. It doesn't try to say, listen, you've got to use a JS engine, even though we've got native UI components. It doesn't try and do the beautiful thing that Xamarin does and have like a mono running on Android. So good things from Flutter. The engine is bundled. That's good and bad, the two sides to that. But what it avoids is trying to have this lowest common denominator, common runtime across all platforms that you see when you try and use web as a substitute for app development, or you have to force users to install plugins. Vince talked about some of the architecture pieces. I think this is actually a really critical reason why Flutter as a cross-platform tool is and framework is going to be different this time to last time. So if you look at a lot of, especially kind of web on mobile, they're trying to have a common runtime. If you look at Flutter, it's saying, listen, the runtimes change. The framework stays the same, the runtimes change, and we're going to build our apps to be the best possible for that runtime. So you've seen this already from Vince. And it just illustrates the point that the actual framework stays the same, but we're going to generate and build apps for the desktop runtime or the mobile runtime or the web runtime. We touched on, we heard a bit about Dart. Funny enough, Dart's got a kind of funny story. It's kind of a bit of a failed language, really. It was really intended to get into Chrome, but never did as a first-class kind of citizen of the Chrome browser, and that forced the Dart team to adapt and turn Dart code into JavaScript code, and they got very good at that. And they also got very good at compiling Dart code into ARM or x64 machine code. So that's really been one of the big successes for Dart and Flutter. Who knows what's going to happen with WebAssembly, but the idea is there. If we've got Dart going out and building into different formats, maybe we can see Dart coming into WebAssembly binaries eventually. And of course, some great things that come with being associated with Google, a lot of community, a lot of tooling, a lot of focus on performance, a lot of focus on testing. They think bigger than just mobile. All of these things are really important if you really want to embrace cross-platform. So the third kind of bet on cross-platform that we think is meaningful is WebAssembly. So if you haven't come across WebAssembly, very simply put, it's running kind of binaries within the browser versus JavaScript in the sandbox. Figma's already been mentioned. This is Figma running in the browser. This is not JavaScript. Anyone who's used Figma will know that this feels as good and as responsive as the desktop. This was a kind of a bit of PR from the Chrome, the Chrome OS team, saying that Square have got a lot of designers using Pixelbooks because they don't actually need to install design software. They can run it straight through in the Chrome browser. And for everyone who was in Copenhagen last week, WebAssembly got a mention right up front. Right, it's clearly a focus for JetBrains, Kotlin. It's something that we're going to be hearing a lot more about. So,
okay, so we were quick, but we still run a little bit. So this is one of the things that I would like to highlight as a very last slide. As an Android developer, whenever we hear cross-platform, we hear Flutter, we hear something, kind of righteously, kind of correctly, we're a little bit afraid of our jobs. Like we're gonna lose our jobs because something is now better. Us not believing it's better doesn't make it worse. If it's gonna happen, it's gonna happen, right? But we've been evolving into new different directions long time already. So let's not lay down and fear the future anyways. It's like we saw in the history, it's correct to be skeptical. I'm very skeptical. Because of the history of cross-platform, I'm in a camp where by default it sucks. You have to prove that it doesn't. And Flutter is getting very close to the point of proving it doesn't. Kotlin multi-platform is already past the point to me because the parameters are different. But it's not fully, not everything is cross-platform. I saw in KotlinConf one company trying to do front-end multi-platform Kotlin, and I think that was a stupid idea. I hope they're not here. But anyway, so these are kind of the things. We don't need to be afraid of our jobs. We're going to learn. The platform knowledge is, like Vince said, the platform knowledge is still required. We're always going to need Android gurus and iOS gurus in there. Doesn't matter what is going to be written. If Flutter is going to happen, it's going to take our jobs, then it's your fault not adapting. But, you know. So, I think that's all. Thank you. There's no time for Qs, I think.
All right, so let's have a short break and we'll start like at 8 for the next part, in 30 minutes. And you can free ask our speakers the questions if you have some, or you can find some stickers over there or some drinks.
I have stickers.
Stickers, please.
Your laptop.
Yeah,
Stickers. Yeah, thank you for your talk. Thank you for computer. Hey. Hi. Okay, let's set you up.
Yeah. Steal everything.
Just make sure you're not forgetting anything.
Yeah.
Okay.
How's it going? Good. Haven't seen you for a while. Yeah. It's been, I don't know. I forgot how long it's been. But it's been a while.
Up in Berlin.
Oh, in Berlin.
Yeah, I'm actually quite happy that. Oh yeah, the pizza. I got to speak.
I have not,
let's not talk about it because my talk.
I have not eaten pizza ever since.
Yeah. But yeah,
Do that ever again?
yeah. Anyway, it's cool. It's cool to organize.
Horrible.
Horrible. I work at JetBrains.
Never actually. I've learned my lesson.
Next time we go out, not tomorrow, you have like carrot sticks and maybe tomato.
I think that's what I think that's what
Because I think we had one meetup.
I was talking to
There already, and I talked to. I think not the worst.
Oh no.
Yeah. I think it's. Do you know how? Can I get like VJ or JetBrains licenses for meetups, or that's more
The same way.
Okay. So do you know what's the policy that you follow, or do you just ask?
Policy, you just need to ask because I'm a software developer. I don't know if there are any sort of policies, but
Okay.
We still got like 20 minutes to go, right?
yeah, but let's make sure it works.
Yeah.
So if you could connect here, because we have troubles with the screen.
Yes.
Let's see. You need the Wi-Fi?
No, I'm cool.
Okay, so now first try connecting the screens. What we do, try to turn it off and turn it on again.
I can
You can do it using doing it here.
HDMI.
Wait, you have HDMI.
I do.
I'm not sure it is the matter of the HDMI.
I'm not either.
So,
We're done. Thank you.
It is
But
like
you have an external screen here so far.
Wait, so let me.
oh, you don't really know. You know, 3D printing, soldering things, building robots, building.
It might be this connector. My thinking is a display.
Right,
Huh?
you're right.
It works. Oh, awesome. Pretty good. You're fine with it.
Oh yeah. No. I was like,
Have an replacement.
why doesn't it work?
Oh, wow. Essentially, if you have a speaker like that for you in the future, that one with the Bluetooth.
All right. Well, we'll see if this one works.
So use that one. Just connect this one.
Yeah, I understand.
Figure out what's going on. Oh, no, it doesn't. Okay, whatever.
Okay, fine. Will it not turn off in 10 minutes automatically? In presentation mode, I hope it will.
We'll see what happens, whatever.
So good luck. you have like 15 minutes to relax.
Oh yeah, no, it's cool.
Oh, we may start. I think we may start a little bit earlier.
We have 15 minutes to panic. That's what you're saying.
Well, I have one joke. I don't know if it works, but if you're like staying here and you're panicking, what you could do, you could count people.
Oh, I will panic more.
Well, you'll be busy counting them, you know.
And then during the talk, I'll be like, oh no, it's so many people. No, it's fine. I will just panic as usual.
Okay. We managed to set this up.
So I can hack
If you like, yeah.
and I can just like
It's YouTube stream. It will stay on YouTube when I stop your custom. It should not disappear. So yeah, but if you like a real backup, you can really continue custom. But it looks like we are good. So
okay. Yeah,
so
then
the backup, thank you. I really
I just go
appreciate the backup.
Okay.
Yeah, so you can turn it off.
I don't use much. I get back to you when Oh, it's the same talk I picked.
It's the same talk.
Oh, okay. Cool. I will just write now something. I will met. I will write you. I'll write it. What do you do now? Why are you here?
I think I'm something like I was very surprised last year. Yes, it's they open sourced it and then they dropped it. Now this now this it's a compiler for Java. It brings Java compilers. That's true. I don't know if it's possible to use Kotlin and now we are Which just only lies stuff on the
Have you read the blog post from
quite important. Now I think about Flutter, Java, or
Flutter web just went speed. I'm really interested about Flutter. I'm one of those, maybe you call it, I'm very skeptical. I kind of think it's like you need to go across platform, absolutely. I was going to go next. Well, if you have like as a company, you never do that. We have those skills. And finding them is impossible.
It took us 3 months, so we still not finished. We still have it just to get the compile to chain, compile it cross-platform. We're not using lots of libraries, we just have a few. Right? We can count on one hand. Right? But okay,
That's why
strategy is one is the side we use English, not the business.
So you guys are looking at this company as a platform.
Yeah, we thought about but something like this happened already from desktop. Definitely not. That's why we decided to know. Because desktop is one of our.
Yeah, completely understand. It's gonna take time.
It used to be more weighted than mobile, but now it's mobile. But also, desktop is not.
Yeah, completely.
Primary business, they also ask you for Linux maybe. But I think decision makers, they love iOS. It's a fun fact, everyone loves Android. But if you talk to decision makers, it's from Android.
We put iOS code in Kenya for language. So the user base is 99.5%, but all the managed side. So we built the iOS except for the managed.
It's exactly the same with ours. We just did everything in Android. And we had a student was taking care of iOS app, and we were playing around. He was playing around frameworks like OEM, the old ones, and now Multiplatform. Architecture is kind of nice. But he didn't get any support, and I asked my boss, guide him a little bit. No, you can do it in your free time. He said, yeah, come on.
Maybe we'll talk about the multi-OS.
I mean, the last version is over 1 year. They're promising a new one for years.
Is it the product or open source?
It's open source.
Then we are very happy.
I know no one knows it, but it's a really nice tool. You can use it. You can
This comes over. We already connected things.
I'm going to talk about it. And it's really interesting because you can write classes in Java and in Swift or Objective-C. It is dumb, that's the same class. So you have a class in both languages and it's going to mix into one. Oh, that's absolutely nice because it works. And then you just call it cross this boundary. And Android Connor is initially my Varga and we invited him, or we booked him, just how he earns money nowadays. It's open source, and that's why he doesn't find the time to improve this. That's the good thing about it. That's why they're still waiting for new version. And he promised a new version. I think it was 2 months ago. He said next week it will be ready. But honestly, he promised the new version May last year. It feels like May last year. But yeah, it still works. It's amazing. It's smooth. But the documentation it could be better. Asynchronous is kind of small, but yeah, it's a pretty good fiction. So you can code your UI natively.
It's actually a Kotlin multiplatform.
I don't know if it's actually really tried, but what if you it would be better.
I will think it.
What is that? That's what Gary thinks like better. I have time for relation, like the argument, just to combine and swap the binary code and then it compiles it to one single binary running on iOS So it's fast. I mean, process.
That's good. No, it's open.
But it doesn't matter. No one knows it.
Yeah.
And they will find
Wir haben halt das Problem, wir können nicht nichts machen, was irgendwie
You sounded like you would actually
das ist schon eine andere Einstellung. Egal, was du immer schauen musst,
No.
dass das wieder
I haven't done that.
Okay, because like last time I used it, I was kind of depressed by setting it up.
Yes. So this is why it's been blocking. So I actually changed it. If that's what's the difference of you will go to test training. Yeah, all of them are. It's on the next level. Like it was like a long term, like in the background. But we also use our we haven't used it for like there's a couple of things I really want to try. But JetBrains is based fully on Multiplatform. I think Hadi Hariri, which is the service, right? And that's what they're built on.
Basically, what I did is a super small app using Ktor and to share database and backend, right? And setting that up was 90% of the work.
For sure.
And if I changed one minor version, and everything broke.
I would give it another go. I planned for the Christmas vacation to give it a go. And
That's
really like
basically the question. Should I give it a go now or wait like 3 4 months?
It's impossible to know. But to me, the whole company is talks and the people I talk to kind of make me feel about it. It's a serious project. Because before, it's always been like, hey, Michael. But now it's a serious project. What is that?
Half a year ago, I said it's going to be a serious project. It's just a matter of time. Right now, it's
Yeah, I would give it a go. I will give it a go.
that's why, like, our company decided to rather go for Flutter right now at least. But I mean, it's a different kind of project.
It's a use case.
You need big projects to make.
I think not in Multiplatform project won't use the concrete things. It's a tool that is different. It's very, very good. That's the whole point of what we talk about. There's so many different things about it. If you choose the right tool,
True multi-platform is for smaller projects. Multi-platform is for like as big as you can get. Bigger the better.
Bigger you have to get, smaller you get. If you just want to share data classes, I need to grab another beer.
But even that would be nice.
I also started to build one.
Wir haben aber die wollen das mal
Do you like to have this wireless microphone? Like that one? No.
I'm going to be cheering in the front row. Booing. If it goes badly, I'm going to boo
For you.
Slide 1, Flutter is fucking great.
So we are starting. We are starting shortly. We are starting, people. Please take your seats and get ready for next two talks. Good luck.
All right, everyone. Is the microphone in a nice position like this, or should I get it closer to my mouth?
It's good.
Great. Just wait. Hurry up, hurry up, hurry up. Don't be as slow as the Kotlin compiler. Sorry, buddy. So, first off, thank you all so much for coming out here tonight. It really means a lot to me, and I say that because I'm like on stage sometimes, and I keep like thinking that's pretty awesome that you like came along and are spending your like free time, or like if it's work time, whatever, still you're spending it. You're getting paid for it, but that's pretty cool. So thanks so much for coming here actually and spending your time. My name is Jossi Wolf, and I'm an Android developer, engineer, consultant, whatever at Snap Mobile. You know, I do Android. And you can find me on Twitter at Jossi Wolf. And you'll find the link to the slides later on my Twitter account, so you should follow me in there. That's not the most important reason. The most important reason is I sometimes tweet dog pictures from my sister's dog, so you should take a peek. All right. So I know we're at a Kotlin special and things, but we might have some people with other backgrounds in the audience. So before I dive into like the whole talk, who of you has heard of Kotlin Multiplatform? That's pretty good. That's pretty good. Oh, yeah, I see an iOS developer over there. That's cool. It's nice that you're here. We're going to explain everything so we're on the same page. Who of you has used Kotlin Multiplatform before? That's pretty dope. Okay. JetBrains space developers don't count. So I want to make sure we're all on the same page about what Kotlin Multiplatform is. So even if you have a different understanding of it than I do, even if I have a different understanding of it than you do, which might be totally wrong, this is the thing I'm talking about. So imagine you have an application, right? And you got it running on a couple of platforms probably, at least like Android and iOS, but you might also have web and you might also have desktop. And you got all like large code bases, it's a complicated product. And in every code base, you have like models like this. For example, like a rabbit entity describing a rabbit. Or you might have some more complex things like calculations going on there. Don't try to understand what's going on there. It's, Jesus, don't get me started. But the point is, this is kind of complicated. And this is not stuff you want to like write 4 times for 4 platforms, right? Because, you know, requirements change, the product changes, features evolve, and you will have to adapt on each platform, which is, you know, kind of expensive. So you will make your managers happy. So you got your like 4 code bases, and you have to change stuff all along. And you're like, okay, what if we took this like fragile-ish code that we have to do so often, and what if we were to just like write it once, right? What if we were to share this code, regardless of like whatever language, be it like C++ or JavaScript or Swift or whatever you want, a Visual Basic script. Just the point is you're sharing code. And you know, this is not a new idea. This idea is it's a lot older than I am. And the thing is, with Kotlin Multiplatform, you basically get this idea of sharing code implemented for Kotlin, which is pretty cool. Now, there are some limitations for this. So say you're taking this model where you have your code bases and then you're sharing code. And you're sharing the code in Kotlin. Now that means that the shared code can only be Kotlin code. The Kotlin compiler is not a magical thing, sadly, which like suddenly knows how to like compile Java to JavaScript or something. Maybe that's a good thing. But that also means that most of the things that you know from usual Kotlin development, like when you're developing an application for the JVMs, like Android or desktop, all those like Java APIs, I was about to say sweet Java APIs, but no, that's a lie. All those Java APIs, they're not available. So for example, like some date APIs and so on, which you might find yourself using in day-to-day development. So be aware, this common module in Kotlin Multiplatform, it can only contain Kotlin code and no Java dependencies. This is very important. We're going to take a look at this later. So ideally, all your like data models should be pretty clean of like platform dependencies and should be working independently. So data models, for example, are a good thing to like start with, a good thing to share in code. There are some limitations to it. We'll get to that later. And also things like fragile computations, which you can't outsource to a server if you're like doing graphics heavy stuff. If you're doing a game, right? Because of the latency, you can't outsource it. So this is where sharing makes lots of sense. Juhani was mentioning a bit of this earlier. So Kotlin Multiplatform brings 2 new language keywords, which are actual and expect. You might have heard of them already. So the idea is that in common modules, you can say, all right, hey Kotlin, I expect this to be there. Like this can be, you can say, I expect this property, I expect this class, this interface, this function to be there. And then Kotlin is like, okay, cool, I'm gonna believe you for now. And then you're gonna have to provide actual implementations. You're gonna have to like say, all right, in your, if you have a JVM module, in your JVM module, you will define the actual val, setting the platform to JVM, for example, or setting it to JS in the JavaScript module. And the nice thing is now you have your expect val defined, right? You can use it in the common module like this. You have the implementation lying in the common module, and you've just outsourced like one implementation detail. So this is a very simplified version of this. Like it's kind of imaginary simplified, but if you were to like run it on JavaScript, you'd get running on JS and on JVM running on JVM, just with this pretty simple example. So remember that you got this pretty cool syntax going on with actual and expect, or expect and actual. So I'm here today to not talk about the basics of Kotlin multi-platform, because there are some really, really good resources out there who put it a lot better than I can do. The Kotlin documentation on this is actually fairly good. And there are some other nice talks from KotlinConf, for example. There's some resources by TouchLab from DroidCon New York, and more. So converting. Right, converting to the true Lord and Savior of Kotlin multi-platform. Is it that? I don't know. There are a couple of steps to this. So I'm an Android developer, and there's this awesome tool which is called Motion Layout. And if you've ever tried to do animations on Android, you know it is very, very hard to get them right. And Motion Layout basically makes your life a lot easier for creating animations. So there was a preview tool which was written by the constraint layout team at Google. It was a prototype. And it was written in Java with Swing. And the code was, let's say, enterprisey. Now, I had some fun realizations during this. And we're going to see some of those later. So all of those lessons learned stem from me trying to convert a Java desktop application to Kotlin multi-platform and failing. So I'm going to be telling you about lessons learned and things you should not do, and a couple of things you should do. So step number 1, identify your components. Say you have your application, which consists of some classes. This is from the application I just mentioned. The names don't really matter for the implementation, but basically what I was looking at was, okay, what of the code can I actually share in a common module? Can I just pull out everything into a common module and just have no platform specific code so my life gets a lot easier? Spoiler, no. I was thinking, step number 1, looking at the components, I could just split them up into UI related, directly UI related, and then the other stuff, which doesn't have platform dependencies, because everything UI will probably have platform dependencies. So I was looking at the components, and I made a list of the directly UI related components, which in my case were those. The names itself don't really matter, but you will notice that you have panel and view in there, and then cycle edit is this weird thing in between, which is supposed to be a custom view. But basically, if you looked at the source code, you have the main panel, which extended from JFrame, and then the animation panel, which extended from JPanel, and then you have the cycle edit, which extended from JPanel as well. And I was like, okay, so attempt number 1 without any previous experience, let's just take this class and move it to the common module. Let's see what happens. And big surprise, well, okay, JPanel wasn't found because it was from Swing. So I was like, well, okay, I can just I learned about using expect and actual, so I could just be sneaky and do this, which kind of made the arrow go away. Maybe this is how Flutter started? I don't know. Okay, I love Flutter. But, then another arrow popped up and was like, hey, you actually got to provide an implementation. You can't just tell me it's there and then it's not there. And I was like, okay, so you can do things like this. I was like, okay, I'll just provide a type alias for Swing on the JVM. And then I still had the JS implementation, which wasn't there. I was like, okay, what can go wrong? I'm just gonna create a class, right? Well, and then there was a method missing. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna add that method, and I'm gonna add a title. And turns out I was trying to create Spring for JavaScript, but it took me a bit to realize that no, this is the wrong approach. Juhani over there is my boss, and he always says, just keep the UI native. The platform knows how to do its job. Sometimes, if it's okay. I'm an Android developer, so talking about animations and so on. But basically, lesson learned number minus 100,000. Just don't try to implement a UI framework. This is the wrong approach. Just keep your UI in the implementations themselves, and that's totally fine. You don't have to share 100% of the code. Now, separating your concerns is super important. We're going to take a look at that later. And yes, your UI should not be shared. There's always going to be weird edge cases, so don't share it. Number 2, I was going back a bit resignated because I was okay, I can't convert the UI. So what am I going to do, right? What do I have left? I have the models left. At least I thought I did. So I was okay, I have this, which are the models. I was kind of grouping them in domain models and data models. I don't want to be starting a flame warrant architecture. This is how I use the terms. Don't at me if you're trying to start a war on this. Basically, the idea is that the data models just are simple models representing some values, and then the domain models are the ones containing some business logic. So let's start with the easier thing, because it's less frustrating. This is a very good tip if you're out in the real world. Try starting with the easy thing, because you won't get frustrated as easily. Converting your data models. So let's look at some of those models that existed over in this application. So as you see, it's relatively simple, not really much of logic going on, just holding some values. So converting that to Kotlin, just using right-click and convert to Kotlin, super easy. That worked, and that was pretty nice because it went fairly well, and I could just convert them all over within the matter of an hour or something, and write nice-ish Kotlin code. So, what about the logic that we had? You might find yourself having some logic somewhere in there, and converting that is, it's okay, right? Because if you take a look, it does not have any platform dependencies, but you could just it's math going on and some calculations. So converting into Kotlin, turns out you can minify the code just by converting to Kotlin using the usual IntelliJ action. And then you can use some of the awesome Kotlin features like when and so on. So if you have messy code, now's the time to clean it up. If you take a look at this, of course, you could just convert it to Kotlin and basically write Java in Kotlin. But that would suck because you would end up with a code base which is, Java, Java and Kotlin multiplatform or something. And trust me, you don't want to have that. So take the time. Most of the times it will be fairly fast. Just, convert it to Kotlin and make sure the code is nice-ish looking. So clean it up. Awesome tips for cleaning your messy code up in models is make use of the collections API. If you're coming from Java, you will probably see lots of for loops and mutable lists and mutable arrays, which you can easily replace with map and filter and map not null, map index, and for each, and so on. You can use this to clean your code up a lot. And also, if you're doing Kotlin multiplatform, chances are you might have some calculations going on. Make sure you're using the correct Kotlin math APIs. Sometimes they're a little different from the existing Java APIs, so make sure you got that going on. Now, we converted, we talked about converting the data models. Let's take a look at the domain stuff, you know, the things that will actually hurt us. So I was mentioning that, that the application was, let's say, enterprisey, right? And I was like, okay, I converted my data models, great. Now I can just like go ahead and I can convert the domain models. Sounds easy enough. Then I took a look at one of the files. I was like, wow, really? You okay. And I was like, I should show you what it looks like. Turns out that's pretty hard. Again, if you have messy code, clean that up now. Turns out like converting domain models isn't always super easy. I was looking at the code. I was like trying to fit code on the slide. By the way, this is the expanded code. Then I like flattened the code, and it was still super small. But one thing stood out to me, which was this beautiful method. And I was like, wait, separation of concerns, which I was talking about, domain model, okay, set UI elements. And then turns out like this beautiful class cycle model also had like was holding references to the view. And I was like, basically, okay, I'm gonna go take a long nap for 2 weeks, and then I will reopen this and be depressed about it again. That was pretty bad, but again, I was looking at some other classes which also had like model in the name, and turns out a lot of them had references to views, like direct references. And turns out that's not a good idea if you can't access those views, the UI layer, which we talked about earlier, in your common module, and if you want to convert to Kotlin Multiplatform. So separating your concerns is important, and if you have messy code, now is the time to clean it up. Now, I've been saying this a lot of the times because I've stumbled upon it like 1,000 times, but I was like making the slides and I was like, I should probably talk about like how you actually refactor really messy code, or how you can like at least try before going to your product manager, like saying, sorry, we can't do this. This project is canceled. So yeah, refactoring really messy code. Not gonna lie, I shed a couple of tears over this. And if you're actually converting to Kotlin Multiplatform, it's okay to cry. It's okay. So now this next section depends on one assumption, which is your data models are okay now, and that you're fine with your UI not being shared. So refactoring, usually you want to have something, or you have something like this. Your UI pings the model with some like actions or user actions, and then the model produces some kind of state. Even if that is the model holding viewed references directly, it's still producing state. So the model contains the business logic. And there's a couple of layers usually to this, even if they're not super explicit. Number one, the repository, which is like responsible for fetching data, storing data, whatever, which might look like this. If you're coming from Android, this might look familiar. So you have like a Rabbit Pictures API, which is implemented in Retrofit. Or if you're coming from iOS, you might have it implemented in Alamofire. Or if you're coming from web, you might have it implemented using Ajax. So your repositories, right, they're always implementation specific. And you don't want to be going to an Android developer and saying, hey, we're doing Kotlin multi-platform now. We have to throw away retrofits. Sorry, right? You don't want to take that away. So turns out this implementation specific stuff, the repository, which might interact with some server, which might like store data in the database, which is also implementation specific, you shouldn't really convert that at first. You can later on try to make it Kotlin multi-platform and use the golden hammer for it, but no need to. You can leave it as it is right now. And then what's left in the model is the presentation, right? Again, I don't want to start any flame wars. So let's talk about the presentation stuff, which was the models I was like flaming about earlier. So lesson 1 I learned in specifically Kotlin multi-platform is extract instead of removing. Like, don't go and be like, okay, you know, remember we had this method set UI elements or update UI elements. Don't just be like, yeah, that's pretty shitty, I don't want to have it, and delete it. No, you should rather extract it to a separate component, still keep it, and push it to another layer, and that's totally fine. Later on, you can go back to that component you extracted, and you can convert that, and you can try to make it better. I was trying to say something with this, but now I'm looking at, I'm like, I'm not totally sure what I was meaning. So let's skip that slide. Turns out this happened to me when I gave the talk the last time. I was like, I should take that slide out, but then again, I didn't. Here I am. So let's talk about models, right? Try to make everything. Oh yeah, I know what I meant. Oh yeah, right. So things that are happening here is very, very direct references. So for example, this parse XML, which was in the cycle set model, you know, you could like create an interface XML parser and then a class implementation of it, just as an example. So lessons learned, don't convert your UI and repo, just for recap, and free your presentation layer of UI dependencies, please. Just because you can, like on Java desktop or Android, put like direct view references in your presentation layer, doesn't mean you should do it. So let's talk again about this beautiful update UI elements. As you see, it has like very direct references. So for example, for this position slider and for a delete button, it controls the state directly. And decoupling this, decoupling this is possible, especially on Kotlin multi-platform, by introducing an explicit, like a very, very explicit state model. If you've done model view intent before, or if you've heard of model view intent, you might know this. This is just something very explicitly saying, hey, this is the view state, this is what it looks like. And then you can very easily go and also turns out I wasn't returning flow here. You can just easily calculate your values still the same way as you did before. You don't have to change anything about that logic. The difference is that you just put those values into a state model directly, and then you return it in some way. You can do that through a flow, you can do that in a suspend function, you can directly return it, whatever works best for you. An important thing to know is you can use coroutines on Kotlin multi-platform actually, which is pretty awesome, and I can like only recommend it. Flows are a very good thing to use for Kotlin multi-platform. Now, then say you have an Android implementation using all of the stuff we just like tried to convert in an activity, right? What you can fairly easily do is just get an instance of the model, which is now available on Kotlin multi-platform. You can listen to the state, and then you can call a render method. This is like a basic strategy on converting like your shitty models to something a little more maintainable. You still will have to do lots of work on cleaning up code, but that's like a good starting point. So I did not talk about a lot of things which are like actually running the code, because there's so much more to it, and dependency management and so on. I encourage you to go to the official Kotlin documentation where all those things are listed. So just to recap, number one, introduce a view state. This is a very useful strategy. Make your data flow unidirectional, so you can easily see what the hell is going on in your application. And don't have hard coupling between layers. Don't have your presentation layer have direct UI references, or right. Don't just make sure your layers can work independently. In normal applications, you can do this, but on Kotlin Multiplatform, you will just see, well, this is not working because the code is literally not accessible. And I want to close with let each platform do what it does best. Don't be like me and try to port over Swing to JavaScript or something. The UI probably, the platform probably knows what it's doing in terms of UI and so on. So just give it back to the platform, convert your expensive business logic to Kotlin Multiplatform, and don't go crazy. Just go slow with it. So thank you all so much for listening. Find the slides on Twitter in about half an hour, and find me up here for questions after the talk.
Is the microphone on the bigger one? I have that microphone or the bigger one? This is great. Thanks.
Enjoy.
Thanks. Is it okay, guys? Let's see if it works.
Tomorrow, yeah. Not tonight.
It doesn't. Oh, it worked. Awesome.
Are we on? Are we on? Do I have to put this on? Can you hear me? It's on? Awesome. So why are you punished over here? Why are you in the dark? What did they do? Who's a mobile developer here? Android, sorry, Android. I thought they probably put the non-Android developers in this corner.
It's just the Flutter people.
Are you the Flutter people? No. Don't be mean, don't be mean. Okay, I can't hook this on, so I'll just put it in my pocket. Anyway, welcome, thank you. I'm actually surprised. How many of you are Android? What are the rest of you? Just Java, Kotlin, server-side, front-end. Okay, I'm out of options. I don't know what else to ask. Okay, well, welcome to this talk on Ktor. And let me just plug this in so that I can do something. So how many of you have heard of Ktor and use it? Okay. Cool. And you got a Flutter t-shirt. Awesome. We can work together in harmony. Right, so Ktor is for those of you that don't do backend. You know the mobile applications that you do? That actually consumes data from somewhere. It's not all magic, which is usually backend. So some of us do backend development. I know the world is not just mobile. So asynchronous framework for connected systems. Otherwise, I like a more catchy title. Asynchronous framework for distributed microservices backed with blockchain. Why? This actually sells better at conferences than the previous title. Why? Because, well, microservices, you can do everything with microservices, and everything is a microservice today. And blockchain, because why the hell not? You just throw that in and it just works. So Ktor is a lot of things. Ktor is a server, Ktor is client, Ktor is multi-platform, Ktor is Kotlin through and through, with a little asterisk that we'll get to in a minute. Ktor is also asynchronous. Ktor is also open source, or otherwise known as free, because let's be honest, how many of you here really care about the openness of source? Yeah, okay. And contribute back. Wow, really? Contribute back doesn't mean filing an issue and saying, I really need this fixed now, and I don't care that you have a life and kids, screw you. Yeah, no, okay. So it's also free. It's built and maintained by JetBrains, that's us, the ones that make Kotlin. Some people think it's, never mind. It's also inspired by Wasabi and Kari. Now, how many people have heard of Wasabi? Wow, that's the most I've ever had hands raised in my life. So Wasabi is a framework that I did. How many of you have used it? Yeah, so, okay, you could have just kept your hand up. So Wasabi was a framework that I did, and it didn't lead to much, but it did lead to the inspiration of Ktor. So I'm proud of that. And I killed Wasabi. We merged. It was bought out by Ktor. And Kara was something that came about before Wasabi, which was, Kara was kind of like, anybody did Kara? Kara was like a Ruby on Rails in Kotlin. And I found that too heavyweight because I came from Express.js, so I tried to do something like Express.js in Kotlin, which was Wasabi, and then Ktor is kind of like that. And now we're full circle because there's a new framework. I don't know what it's called, whether it's Kweb or whatever it is, but it's now, that is Ruby on Rails written in Ktor to simulate Kara. We're actually starting to become like the JavaScript community. Every day there's a new framework. Ktor can be used for creating server-side applications, which is what we'll cover a lot here, HTTP APIs, which is different to RESTful systems. But if you don't agree with that, well, then just pretty APIs with JSON. Sockets, client-side connections, and Ktor goals. This is probably the most important slide. It's meant to be simple, flexible, performant, and cross-platform, right? And every time I read that slide out, I'm kind of laughing at myself because I'm like, would you ever put up a slide that says it's meant to be complex, rigid, underperforming, and only works on a single platform? But hey, those are great goals to have. Okay, so a simple server, what does it look like? This is your main function, and you have an embedded server, and you have basically there's an engine. It can use different types of engines. In this case, we're using Netty on port 8080. And then I have a routing, depending on where you're from, where you have all of your different routes. So you have your get, and inside get, I have the route path, and then I do like respond text, hello Ktor. And that slide has a bug, which I still haven't fixed. Can anyone tell me what it is? No, it's not. What colon? What colon? Semicolon? We don't have semicolons in. Well, we do, but they're optional. What?
The call is undeclared.
No, it's in context. The receiver, for the receiver.
What is the bug? It's really, really simple.
You don't have to offer a content type because you're responding a text already.
Well, apart from that, the content type is actually wrong. But browsers these days don't care, so right. That should be text plain, but it's text HTML. Yes, I'm not too smart. My bugs are even stupid. So what does Ktor do? Ktor is basically a bunch of modules. So if you think of Ktor, are you familiar with Spring Boot and controllers? Yes? Okay, well, this is nothing like that. I'm just saying that to confuse you. So Ktor application consists of a bunch of modules, and each of these modules can have a single controller, it can have a single microservice, or it can be the entire application. The idea is that you can set up multiple modules for your application and host them all under a single server. And we'll look at modules in a little bit. But generally what we found is that a lot of people just use a single module for their application. The way that it works, a request comes in, it goes through this thing called a routing. Then you get your app logic, which is where you look at your database and do your business logic and whatever, and then you do your response. In between things, you have these things called features. So if you're familiar with Express.js or Sinatra or any of the other frameworks, if you've heard of middleware anyone? Interceptors, yes, this is essentially the same thing. So a feature is kind of like a middleware where you can do different things. So for example, you could do encoding, you could do a compression. All of these are essentially features that you can add to a Ktor application. Now, Ktor goes one step further, and routing itself is also a feature. So routing is built into the box, so to speak, for Ktor, and it's implemented as a feature. And I'll show you how that's done. So with that, let's finish the slides and let's move over and see some code. Okay, so I'm going to start very, very simple, which is called simple. So this code doesn't have a bug. You see, it's got text plain. So there I've got my application. Now, if you remember the slides, you had kind of like here, you would have this setting up the netty and then opening up the port and all of that stuff. We don't have any of that here because normally in a real world application, you don't want to do that essentially in the main. What you want to do is kind of delegate that to some configuration file. And Ktor allows you to do that. What you have here is a file called application.conf, which essentially is telling me how I want to deploy Ktor, the port I want to deploy it on, and then the modules that we were talking about. Now, in this case, you can have, in Ktor, you can have as many modules as you want. But what I'm going to do is essentially comment each line out as I'm showing you the different functionality in the different examples. So in this case, we're starting with simple. Okay, so if I were to go to the simple application, we've seen that it just responds with hello world. How do I actually launch this? That's where the application.kt comes in. So the application KT is basically my main entry point, my main function in Kotlin. And in this case, what I'm doing is I'm saying serve all this up with netty. Now you can use netty, jetty, and a bunch of other things, which we'll see later on. But in this case, I'm saying just create the engine, use netty under the covers, and launch this. So when I hit run, what is going to happen is going to read the configuration file, launch the application, and there you go. Now, you could pass arguments here as well. If it doesn't find the argument, so you could define a port here on the command line. If it doesn't find it, it will default to the application config. And once we've done that, it launches, and you can see that I have my hello world over here. Okay? Now, these are the applications that I've basically built for demos, but if you want to get started with Ktor, what you can also do is go to the browser and then type start.ktor.io. Okay? Now, I don't know where we were inspired to do that. I think it was something like start.spring.io. It's kind of that. You see, we don't have the cookie warning. We do not have the cookie warning. So there you go. So you've got that, and you can basically choose a whole bunch of things, and then you can click build, or you can install the IntelliJ plugin. If you install the IntelliJ plugin, you do file new, project, and you get your Ktor over here, and you basically get the same functionality. Okay? So you can, I wouldn't do this because it normally never works, but it's there, and one day it will work. But normally you don't use the wizard to create the new application as such. That's kind of like, for demos and things, it's nice. Okay, so let's go to the next example. I'm going to quickly show you some quick features that it has. We'll go as fast as humanly possible because they told me to leave here at 9, so. Okay, so all I've done here now, notice that I haven't changed any code. All I've done is comment out the module and put in a new module, and I can hit run, and I can see that I have my new server running. So in this case, what I'm doing is the HTML, and what this is doing, if you see, I say HTML DSL, and am I running the wrong example? Oh, sorry, I'm running static. So on the static one, what I'm doing here is I'm going to respond to a static thing. So I've got a static, and then I've got this thing called resources. So static, what it's saying is that anything under this URL is going to be static. So I don't need to open any file, input or anything and serve it. It's automatically going to find it. So anything under the path static, it's going to treat as a static file. And then resources is pointing to where this is on disk, where this maps to. So in this case, you see that I have this folder resources, and under there I have static, and then under that I have all of my different files. So if I want to launch Ktor logo, what I would do is just type static Ktor logo, and that would launch my Ktor logo. Okay? Very simple, nothing extra added. It's basically built out of the box. And the next one, which I wanted to show, was this HTML. Now, in this case, let's just go here and right. So run this, and then we get HTML DSL. Okay, now this has got a couple of beautiful things. First of all, if you take a look at it, use source. It's just clean HTML. There's no jQuery or Bootstrap or anything like that. Now, some people, when they look at this, they're like, yeah. I mean, look at this code. You're like, that is horrible. It's like, ugh, you're mixing like Kotlin code with HTML. That's disgusting. And I say, yes, remember React? Apparently with React, that isn't a thing, but with this, it is a thing. So yes, this isn't actually part of Ktor, obviously. This is Kotlin X HTML. How many of you know that library and use it? Right. It's okay. You can use it. Don't worry. It's not impure to do this. The whole separation of concerns was talking about something different, not about the actual technology that you use. But yes, this is basically kind of like JSX files, except it's HTML. Okay, and it's not from Facebook. Okay. Any questions so far? People never ask questions in my talks. I don't know why. But Sebastian was saying to me, oh, yes.
So how fast is the developer turnaround time? So
what?
If I would write unit tests like this Spring Boot, it takes like 20 seconds or so. So how fast is Ktor?
I don't know. We don't really write tests.
Okay.
It's actually very fast, and that's one of my examples. So I'll show you. But you see also the booting is quite fast.
Yeah.
The booting is quite fast. It's in comparison to other things, the booting is quite fast. Oh, you got that, did you? Great. Excellent. Someone said to me, like, what are you doing in your demo so that it boots so fast? I'm like, it just does. So you see, this is another one. You see, it's already booted, launched. So this is an example. I'm not going to run every single example, otherwise we won't have time. But this is another example. Like here, what I have now is I have a routing and I have a get. And in the get, what it's doing is going to respond with the HTML form. Okay, so it's going to respond with a multi-part form where I can basically input some text, file upload, and then get some information from the file, etc. And I'm basically doing the form over here. These are all, strongly typed functions. And I'm saying the input type field, the file input, the form action, and notice this because we'll come back to it, and multi-part form data, right? And then I have the post verb, which accepts that same URL. And then in this case, what I'm doing is essentially going through the multi-part and then doing whatever I want with it, whether it's an input field, whether it's a file, etc. So notice that it already has support for multi-part forms. It also, one other thing to notice with Ktor is that you don't actually have access to the request and response directly. You go through this call object, right, to kind of try to make a uniform feeding whatever it is that you're doing, whether you're doing HTTP or what have you. So this essentially basically is going to respond with a form and then launch it. So if I were to launch this, I think I've got the right configuration file. Yes. So we do index. So you can see that I can type something and then I can do choose file and then I can say a.ping and then send that, and you see that it gives me back the information from the text input field, the file type, etc. Okay? So we'll come back to that because that has some issues which we'll try and solve. Now, one of the things I spoke about was features. So what is this concept of features? As I said, it's kind of like middleware. So here's already one feature. The way that you use a feature is you basically say install and then the name of the feature. And again, there's a whole bunch that comes in the box. So in this case, what I'm doing is doing install default headers. That essentially means just add the default headers to every request and response. So out of the box, it doesn't do that. Usually with every application, you would do an install default headers. So this would basically just, when I call headers, it would send back some default HTTP headers. You can navigate to the default headers to see exactly what these ones are. But let's go to something a little bit more interesting, such as JSON. So in this case, I also have the same feature. I'm installing JSON. When in this case, I'm not actually installing JSON, I'm installing the concept of content negotiation. Everyone familiar with that? Content negotiation is essentially when there's a negotiation going on between the client and the server of how you want the data to be sent, in what format. So you've probably seen that a lot. When you make a request, you put application/XML, application/JSON, etc. All of these are sent with the accept header, and the server responds with the different types of data format that it can send. So, but that isn't just plain forward. What happened, straight like that, just sending a request and responding. Since you send different types of content types, each of them have a weight, which is represented by the Q that you sometimes see in the header. So you see Q 0.5, Q equals 1, etc. So what the client and server do is say, okay, I accept these different types of formats, and then the server tries to prioritize which is the main one it accepts. If it has it, it can send it back. If it does not, it goes down the list until it can send back. Right? And if it cannot send back, it sends back what status code?
404? 404?
No, that's not found.
Yeah. It didn't found?
No. Media format not supported. Yes? Listen, I used to study my status codes when I was young. And that's the sad part about that is not a joke. Now, this feature also does something else. This feature also has this part which is called the configuration part, and I'll show you how you create that. But essentially, every feature, you install it, and then some of them optionally have this ability to configure it. So in this case, what I'm doing is I'm configuring it with JSON, which is a serializer. Right? This is the JSON that you know. Or like Jackson, we have support for JSON, Jackson, and Kotlin serialization. And you can see that I have, static typing here, everything that's got to do with that actual library. So every feature not only allows me to use it, but also to configure the actual properties for that feature. So in this case, what I'm doing is saying I'm going to install the feature of content negotiation, and that automatically now allows me to just respond with an object, and Ktor will automatically serialize it to the supported formats. So you can see that when I do a request for customer, I'm not doing any kind of, manual serialization or conversion to JSON. I'm just saying, customer 1, Mary Jane, and then respond with model, and it will automatically respond with JSON, right? So if we were to run this, just put this as, where are we? JSON. So run this one. And you see that I'm going to add request customer. So I'll say /customer. And you see that it responds with the JSON. Okay? So you have support for different types of serializations. You can create your own serializer to different formats, etc. But the content negotiation isn't just about serializing, but it's also about actually doing that kind of negotiation that I spoke about. Okay. So now, authentication, I'm not going to actually... let's see if we can, we can run it, I think. Authentication. So, authentication. So, authentication, we have support for different types of authentication. In this case, I'm just showing you basic authentication. So again, it's a similar scenario in which I install a feature, and then I configure that feature. So in this case, I'm configuring basic authentication, and I have the realm auth sample, and then some extremely intelligent business logic to check that. And then you have the idea of the user ID principle. So basically, you can set this principle and then persist this during the session to be able to access that credentials. This is, again, configuring the authentication. When I want to use it, all I have to do is essentially wrap my roots in the authenticate. Okay? and then I can have different types of authentication. So if I have multiple types of authentication on different realms, I just wrap them in the different routes in this case. So if I were to run this and call get, it would just respond. And if I were to call secure, it would prompt up the box. So if we run it, so you see that this doesn't work. There you go. And then if I do secure, it pops up the box at ABC, ABC, and then it shows me the secure area. Okay. Okay, now let's see how you actually implement the feature. Implementing features are actually quite simple. So you essentially create a class. In that class, you have a nested class which contains the configuration of that feature. So in this case, for example, I want to create a feature that is called custom header. So I want to be able to set a custom header, a name for a custom header and a value for the custom header. So I would create a feature called custom header and then have the configuration of that. So that is the part that you set up and you set the values that you want for your feature. And then you essentially implement this class over here, which is application feature, which gives you access to the call pipeline, which does the intercepting, which does the all of the request response, whatever it is that you want to do, you do it in this stage of it. And then if you want to essentially use that feature, much like we saw before, install custom header, and then these are the properties that I had for my configuration. I set the properties and then use it just the same way. Right? And if you look through the source code, you can see that essentially all of the features are implemented much the same way. It's essentially one class, one companion object that you have to implement, and then anything else is additional configuration that you have. Okay. God, I'm going fast. 5 minutes. Routing. Right. Routing. 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 Let's say it one more time, Hadi. Routing. Routing. Okay. Now, what you've seen so far is basically I've defined a whole bunch of I've defined a couple of routes in the application and then just put everything there. And in this case, I'm doing this here as well, but we'll see how you actually should structure an application. So, but what's interesting here is that Ktor is quite flexible in how you define your routes. So at the top, I have routing get, which is the route, the main route, which we've seen so far. But then I have another section which I'm actually calling route customer. So this means that everything that falls under /customer. And then inside this, I do my get and post for that customer. Here I have another example, which is route employee. So everything that falls under employee. And this one has a parameter, which is the route parameter, right? So in this case, this parameter is representing customer 10 or 20. So that ID is representing that 20. This is the route parameter. How do I access it? Call parameters ID. It's not great, and we'll see a slightly different way to do that. Here I have routing shipment and international. So this is now nested routes. The point of this is that you can essentially do whatever you want with Ktor, which is good and bad. Because whereas if you take an application such as, for example, Spring, or a framework like ASP.NET MVC, if there's any .NET developers here, it gives you strict kind of guidelines of how you do things, right? In Spring, you want to create a customer with paths, you create a customer controller, you add the REST controller annotation, and then you get all the different paths. Here, you have the flexibility really to do whatever you want, right? Essentially, these routes are functions. They're nothing more than higher order functions. So then that raises the question of how do I actually structure my app? Well, again, it really depends. So you could have, you can wrap everything in a class if you want, or you can basically have files, and then inside those files have functions for your different routes. So for example, I could have my home routes here, I could have my about route here. It's completely up to you how you want to structure the application, right? Similar to how you basically structure your functions and stuff in Kotlin, right? I mean, one of the things that Kotlin always added was the ability that you no longer have to have util class, right? This whole thing that we had like util class and then string helpers and then all of these additional classes where we would put a whole bunch of junk functions, right? Kotlin got rid of that. Now we just have junk files. where we put a whole bunch of junk functions. So with Ktor, you can put your junk roots in any junk files you want. So that's the app structure. Now, if we go back to the post example, you saw that I said emphasize on this form that I have to use this form over here, right? And also, if we went back to the routing example, which was, where was it? What was it called? Routing. You saw that we had this ID. Now, is there a better way to do this, or is there a different way to do this? Yes, you can use locations. Now, disclaimer, locations is experimental, still, I believe. Locations is also, in my opinion, probably the worst name they could have given this. How many of you are familiar with the location header with HTTP? Okay, so that's not that. There you go. It's confusing now, isn't it? So for those not familiar, the location header with HTTP, as defined by the RFC, is essentially when you make a post, when you create a new resource on the server, you can use the location header to respond with the URI of that resource, which is very, very useful. They decided to call this location. I don't really agree, but anyway. Who am I? So location here, what this is basically doing is allowing you to create static roots. So you don't have to use strings all the time. Okay? So in this case, I'm saying location and the root, the home folder, class index. Now notice that this is in lowercase because we're using class not as a real class, but basically as to define the root. In the second line, I'm saying employee/ID, which is the root parameter, and then employee, and then the parameter is matching exactly the name that I'm passing in with the property. What this means now is that I no longer have to do what we saw before, which is get and then string index, but I do get generic index. Okay? So I have access to this index. So moving forward in my application, I would always refer to this path as index. I would never use strings. Much the same way, when I have this, when I refer to get employee, now I have static properties. I have the actual properties which are referring to the root parameters. Okay? So this is probably the better way to use the roots, so you don't have to end up in a situation where, you know, if you want to refactor something, you got to do searches. Unless, of course, you're using IntelliJ, in which case you can say, I want to rename this string, and then it will say, do you want to rename all these other 3,000 strings? And you're like, okay. And then like, oh shit, what did I do? Let me roll back. And yeah, so you can just do this. Okay, asynchronous. Asynchronous, so Kotlin, Ktor is built from the ground up asynchronously. And if you want to basically do asynchronous calls, well, basically all you do is essentially use just suspend functions and then work the same way that you would with coroutines. Under the cover, in Ktor, everything is pretty much asynchronous. And last but not least, so that we have time, and you're going to have to forgive me 1 or 2 minutes, testing. Now, testing is actually quite fast. So if we were to go to the test, notice that I can essentially run this, and it's immediate. It doesn't boot up anything. It essentially just runs the test, right? So it doesn't boot up the entire infrastructure. And you can test everything in terms of your routes, your responses, all of that without having to boot up the entire thing. And essentially what I'm doing is I have this with application test, passing testing true, and in my application here, I just have a testing boolean equals false. That's the only parameter I need to pass to it. Everything else stays the same. Of course, you can also do your integration tests, which is obviously something important that you always need to do. Back in the old days when 20, 25 years ago, integration test was shipping it to the customer. So deployment options, embedded, Jetty, Tomcat, Netty, CIO. Anybody know what CIO is? Well, apart from you. What's CIO? Okay, I'll give you a clue. IO stands for input output, and C stands for coroutine. So it is? Well done, yeah. We should give out licenses. So you know that star? You know the experimental feature in Kotlin when you see the experimental and everyone's like, oh, I shouldn't use this? No, you should totally use that. But the star you shouldn't use. I mean, you should use it, but don't ship this in production. The idea is that we want Ktor to be multi-platform. So Netty is amazing, but we're also experimenting with doing our own kind of like under the covers thing to eventually make that multi-platform. Containers, Tomcat, Jetty, supports Java 6 through, I haven't updated these slides for about 6 months, so I think it's Java 17 now or something like that. So Google App Engine, Heroku, Docker containers. I don't even know what Kubernetes is, but it supports that too. More information, ktor.io or start.ktor.io. Thank you. Any questions?
Why multi-platform?
Why multi-platform? So there's been a whole 4 hours of multi-platform here. Why not? I mean, we want to. One of the.
What is your server? What is your multi-platform? So you want to run it on iOS, on Android, on whatsoever as a server?
Yes.
Thanks.
Yes.
Node.js.
Because there's people that use JSON. You don't have to. You can use Jackson. You can create your own custom implementation, or you can use the Kotlin serializer support. So it's up to you what you want to use. But multi-platform is kind of like our strategy moving forward, right? So we want to provide multi-platform support not only for clients, but also for servers. Hey, I would love to be able to run my server, potentially compiled in Kotlin native on any platform if I want. Yes? No, it's the gentleman behind you first, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Can you say where you're using Ktor in production server?
Are we using it?
Yeah, I mean,
Oh, totally. Have you heard of JetBrains Space? No? Really? Damn it, I did a bad job. Okay, so this is my, okay, look, you know what? You got pizza, so we can do this. So JetBrains Space is a product we just recently launched, which is essentially version control, communications, chat, everything. It's even got the kitchen sink. No, it doesn't. And that's running on Ktor. Yep. So, and we've been working 2.5 years on. 2.5 years? Max? 2.5 years? 2? Yeah. 2? Whatever. So there was you and then, yes.
Yeah, not that serious to be honest. I think the status code you were looking for was 415 for media type not supported. I only know that because it happened to me last week. But you said you started your status codes when you were young. I think we're about the same age. When I was young, there was nothing around like HTTP.
Yes, there was. What do you mean? The RFC had all of the status codes. Okay, listen. Young is very relative here. Right? I'm not talking about when I was 10 years old. No. And I'm not that old either.
So from a server point of view, how does it do with stuff like WebSockets? Is that taken out of the box?
If we have WebSockets
if you were going to use real-time stuff using WebSockets.
We're using WebSockets, right? We're using WebSockets in space, in fact. Yeah. Yeah. Yes?
How about HTTP 3 support? That's coming up like in the next couple of years.
Yes, I think we're working on that.
Okay.
Yeah. Even if we're not, it sounds good. This isn't recorded, no. Any other questions? Yes?
oh, sorry. I was just...
You were just scratching your head? Yes?
Yeah, just for the Paravet, protocol buffers.
What?
Protocol buffers.
Yes, we have support for protobuf, I think. Well, I mean, in Kotlin serialization, we have support for protobuf. So, yeah.
What do you use as front-end for spaces?
Max can answer that.
Kotlin React plus style components, like wrapped to Kotlin style. What else?
Yeah, and in fact, in Kotlin Conf, Max had a talk about. That's Andre. So he had a talk which was beautifully called. Yes, you guessed it. Where is it? There you go. It was called Kotlin in Space. And he goes into details of how it's built space. So I'd recommend you watch that.
Any other questions?
What
about transaction management of some feature that Spring got?
So I don't think we have transaction management out of the box, but you could basically build that yourself as like a custom feature. Hey, what?
I mean, it's not transaction management is not a thing that supported by Ktor because it's not a job of Ktor to do.
Sure, but yes, but I mean, if you want to try and create some kind of feature that allows for transaction management, you can install it as a feature, just like Spring has. But I mean, that's the beauty of open source, right? But we do have other things, like for example, recently we had some contribution from community like Coin. Have you heard of Coin?
Yeah.
Yeah, Coin is dependency injection. Unless you are an Android developer, then you have to use Dagger no matter what. But it's quite simple to, like, if you want to do these kind of things, you can create them as features and just install them. Yes?
Do you have profiles like Spring or properties or such things?
As in having different configurations? I believe, no, not out of the box with application conf. No, you would have to basically switch the file. But don't let that put off using it. We do accept feature requests as well as pull requests. Yes?
Do you have some kind of object relational mapping in space, or do you use something like that in Ktor?
We have it here on Earth as well. I could always, Exposed. Exposed is the framework that you wrote, no? No. You use it.
We use it.
Yeah, use it. So we use Exposed, which is a library on. Sorry, I got to switch this off because it's frying up my CPU. This, and this. When I saw this design, I'm like, what's missing? The blinking. That's missing. So yes, we use